Hello, everyone, and welcome to Conversations with Matt Delacry. So, I want to talk about another super fun topic today. All those laws in the Old Testament that seem really horrible to us, like slavery. Why in the world would a good and loving God not only just allow slavery, but actually command it in the Old Testament? He did. So, what's up with that? And why would we worship a God who clearly doesn't even have his own moral compass pointing in the right direction? So I want to start by asking a question. What is the purpose of a law, either a single law or laws in general? I think the point is to bring everyone up to a minimum level so that they can work together. I mean, you don't create laws to teach people, everyone in the population, to behave more poorly towards each other, do you? You're trying to bring everybody up, not down. Okay, so think about this. When we read a law that says something essentially like, treat your slaves at least somewhat fairly, we need to ask the question, how bad were things such that treating slaves somewhat fairly represented an improvement in people's behavior? What kind of horrible world did people live in that represented a step up? And that's the first point that I want to make. The ancient Near East was a really rough place. And because of that, the laws that were given to them to help them take a step up are not going to look very refined and civilized to us. You have to knock the rough edges off before you can start polishing it. As God was shaping his people, he had to start where they were. He could not start polishing them immediately. He had to start working on all the rough spots before he could start to refine them. And again, the ancient Near East, which included the people of Israel, was a really rough place. Israel was still a rough board and a long way from furniture. She would need some work before she was ready for a polish. There's also something else we need to consider about these barbaric Old Testament laws. God was not giving Israel some timeless moral values. He wasn't trying to create an ideal society. He was trying to create a society that acted rightly within an ancient Near Eastern context. That means Israel could not do perfect justice. It had to be justice within an ancient Near Eastern context. And because we don't live in the ancient Near East, it's going to seem strange to us. But the idea was that if Israel actually lived according to the laws and pattern of life that had been set in front of them, it would have looked like they were living by high morals to the people around them. God wanted them to act in such a way that the world may know who the true God was. The problem is that timeless morals would have made them look strange, but not a helpful kind of strange. Let's assume for a minute that Israel could have lived up to a perfect set of timeless moral values. Now we know they couldn't because they couldn't even live up to this, set of morals that we're calling barbaric. The entire Old Testament is basically a record of their failures. If they couldn't get over the low bar, then how in the world would they be able to get over the high bar? But for the sake of argument, let's assume for a minute they could get over the high bar. What would that have looked like to their ancient Near Eastern neighbors? I think it would have looked pretty strange, wouldn't it? It would look like hobbits looking at elves and thinking, oh wow, aren't those strange and interesting people? Anyway, let's go back to our hobbit ways. I think God's goal was that so that the world may know. And this is not something that could be accomplished by someone who looks completely different than you, someone who lives and acts in a way that you could never possibly reach. They had to be similar to reach others and make a difference. You need hobbits to reach hobbits. So again, the laws in the Old Testament do not represent timeless morals. They represent God's morals for God's people within the world of the ancient Near East. And the ancient Near East was a very rough place. God was revealing himself within the context of an ancient society to help people move in a positive direction. Now, before I take questions, I want to go ahead and answer one objection that I know some people will have. They would argue that God would never lower himself in his values like this. They would say that he would never contextualize himself like this. He would never alter his morals to fit within an imperfect ancient society, and he would never command anything less than perfection. My response to this is that I think people who make this argument haven't really considered what Christianity actually is. The whole point of Christianity is that God has contextualized himself as a human to reach us where we are. For the unbounded, infinite God to take on the form of a human is a greater step down than anything we're talking about with Old Testament laws. So God will absolutely step down for us. He doesn't merely call to us from the side of the mud hole we're in and tell us to come out this way. He gets in the mud with us right where we are and helps us out of it himself. And that's what we see in the Old Testament. Humans were pretty messed up back then, not that we're wonderful now. But what you see was God reaching us where we were and helping us to take one more step up. That's what he did then, and that's what he's doing now. So let's get on to questions. First one, how do we know what is good and what is out of date? Yeah, that's really, really hard. And I don't know that there's a solid answer to that right now. Um, the best thing that I would try, the place I would say to start looking is understand that all of these laws were meant for a person to operate within the context of the ancient Near East. So instead of trying to look at them as timeless morals, try to see what was the point God was trying to teach them at that time. And then how do we take that point and translate it into today? Um, Let me use a New Testament example and do a really, really simple one. The command is given, husbands love your wives. Okay, that means something different to different people. That would have looked one way in, the ancient Mediterranean world in the time of Jesus, and it might look a little bit different today, but the command is still the same either way. So acting out love your wife is going to be the same, but it varies a little bit from situation to situation. That's a really, really simple version. Um, the Many of the ones in the Old Testament are really, really complicated and harder to translate. But I think maybe you can get the idea from some of them that you want to show justice and fairness to people regardless of their circumstances. Slaves are treated not well in the ancient world. They're very, very badly. Israel was trying to do a little bit better than everybody else. It's still not good, but a little bit better. But there were other ancient laws in Israel's legal code that talked about, um, treating. They didn't give different punishments for different classes like we did up until the very recent history in the West. Rich people have one standard, poor people have another standard. They didn't do that. So you see an idea of moving in the direction of justice and fairness, regardless of people's station, even though it's still in a very, very imperfect world. So if you can, try to get a feel for where things are moving and go in that direction. Next question. So when God gets in the mud with us um, to get us out, is he showing empathy? In part, yes, it's empathy. In part, it's we're actually just incapable of getting ourselves out of the mud. So we really need to take him to take us by the hand and help us out because we're just not capable. Which is one of the reasons him standing on the side and calling to us doesn't work because we just can't. We need somebody to walk with us step by step. So yeah, it's empathy, and it's also doing what's necessary to actually help us. Next question: did Jesus talk about the old laws being replaced by the new covenant? He talked about not replacing the law, but being a fulfillment of it, which means that he in the direction that he was taking things and what he was doing with his ministry was what the law always was intended to do. At a very high level, what this means is that if you think of the large picture of God and man, with everything was created back here in the garden and where things are going to end up, like that Revelation is pointing towards, but isn't quite there yet. Things were good, and the vertical relationship between God and man was good in the beginning, and then everything got messed up, and God has been progressively working on reshaping us and renewing us back into these beings that have a connection with him, a solid connection with him. Right now it's kind of iffy. um, when we mess up we separate ourselves and blah blah blah, longer discussion. So it's not that he's replacing, is he's trying to fix that connection between us and God that we had and broke. So that's what all that God's Spirit's going to be in you thing. You're going to be renewed in God's image. You're going to have forgiveness and so on and so forth. There's a whole bunch of different ways of describing what is going on, which is that this relationship, this vertical relationship between God and man, is finally being repaired. Um, how that looks as far as what you're supposed to do is more complicated, but try to think of everything that you do being a reflection or a representation of who God is and Him living through you. And that's the idea that's trying to be communicated. Comment: in today's world, I'm not sure we've made much progress. What the world does is one thing, what we as individuals do is another. We want to try to improve the world around us, but the way we do that is by dealing with our own issues first. And that's something that a lot of moral teachers um, across a lot of faiths have preached, both ancient and modern. Um, I think it was Gandhi who said that you must be the change you wish to see in the world, and all of those things, whether it's Gandhi, whether it's Jesus, whether it's other ancient philosophers, everybody who's thought deeply about the topic of ethics and morals and change will say that yeah, you have to actually fix yourself first before you're able to fix somebody else. I mean, airlines even do this. You must put the mask on yourself before you put the mask on somebody else. The obvious reason being that if you don't put the mask on yourself first, you're going to pass out from lack of oxygen, then you can't help anybody else. You need to get yourself in a position to where you're going to be able to help somebody else, and then you can help somebody else. And so, if the world looks bad right now, step one is make yourself as good as you can possibly be, and then you can start working on the rest of the world. So that's it for today. Thank you all for joining in. I hope you had a good Thanksgiving, and we'll see you next week.